let's go.
Realize this, but oftentimes corporate innovation looks like a corporation opening a fancy new headquarters near a college, followed by a hackathon or two, the end. But maybe corporations are doing more than that. Maybe they can, maybe they should, and maybe they will. We're going to talk about all of that on this next panel. Our moderator, well, I don't know. Is your bio now Shadow? Is that your bio, Brian? Our moderator's bio is in flux. Brian Sayre just started actually with Shadow, so we're really happy to have him on board, and he's going to introduce all the panelists while they have this conversation about corporate innovation. So let's just welcome them all, and we'll take it from there.
It doesn't matter to me. It's a long line when you're looking at it from this perspective. Thank you, everybody. Those of you that have stuck around for the kind of wind down of the conference. I know last day, post-lunch crowd, it can be a little hard, but hopefully we can provide some entertaining content for you all this afternoon. Just a little bit about myself. My name's Brian Sayre. I am the newest member of the Shadow Ventures team. And by newest, I mean informally second day here right now. A couple of my colleagues from my previous engagement and a company I'm going to stay involved with, Venadar, is here. Specializing in corporate venturing, my entire career has kind of been focused around innovation, and it's almost become somewhat of an obsession of mine trying to figure out how corporates can better deploy innovation practices, and beyond that, how they can engage and partner with the startup community. It is a true belief of mine that, and it might be a millennial speaking naively, but that corporations and startups, when they work together, can create tremendous value for both sides. So enough about me. Let's go ahead and introduce our panel. And we have a really diverse crowd from some of the top corporations right here based in Atlanta. And what's, I think, so interesting about this group is they all have a very innovative role, but it's also a very different role within their respective organizations. So I think breaking down and understanding how these roles play within their organization and kind of what their specific job is should be an interesting and engaging conversation when these guys start discussing it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carrie Moore, the Experienced Design Lead at Delta the Hangar. Will Thorburn, the Director of Clean Tech Strategy and Innovation at Cox Enterprise. Woody Falk, the VP of Innovation and New Ventures at Chick-fil-A. And our outside service provider, Casey Lett, the SVP of Innovation at 352 Innovation.
Strategy,
sorry. We had a last minute change. Casey was supposed to be Robert, so surprise. So I'm going to go ahead and just start off with kind of a softball for everybody. If you guys could just kind of go down the line, starting with Carrie. How is innovation defined at your company? And go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit more about your background.
Hey, so I'm Carrie, and I'm with Delta Hangar's Global Innovation Center. Delta has been practicing innovation for many years. Our Innovation Center is only 3 years old, but Delta's been practicing innovation well before that. And I think that is seen and is proven through our superior service that only increasingly improves over time. And my role at the Hangar is Experienced Design Lead. I think it's important to know that on our Hangar team we have designers, engineers, strategists, and researchers. So I lead the design portion of the team and all elements of design, from our design thinking processes to planning out projects and how the design flow of the projects will go, to even concept design, et cetera. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Casey Lett. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy at 352. We are an innovation and growth company headquartered here in Atlanta. I am the co-founder of our innovation practice and also the co-founder of our innovation community called Off the Record. It's again based here in Atlanta with about 700 members, representative of corporate innovation, startup ecosystem, and education. And what my role is in the company and what the company is doing is serving Fortune 500 and Global 1000 companies on helping them find, build, and grow, ideally, their next billion-dollar business. And so our team historically had been very focused on product, had been very focused on strategy and new technology inside of companies. And about 3 years ago, noticed a shift that was happening in the ecosystem. It was the chief marketing officer, chief technology officer was now becoming the chief innovation officer, the chief strategy officer. And there was a strong need to go disrupt themselves is what we began to hear. And so really to understand that, created this community, practiced a little design thinking ourselves, going directly to the customers, and then built a practice around that. So excited to be here today.
Hey everyone, my name is Will Thorburn. I'm a director of clean tech strategy and investments at Cox Enterprises. Have been at Cox for almost 9 years now, which feels like a long time. So you made a millennial crack. Like, that makes me kind of a unicorn millennial that I've been somewhere for almost a decade. Background in strategy and M&A. What we're doing at Cox Clean Tech is actually pretty unique. And I think your question, Brian, was how is innovation defined at your companies? Cox is a big business, 120 years old, 21 billion in revenue, 3 major operating divisions of multi-billion revenue themselves. And so I think we probably have every flavor of innovation somewhere within that picture. For my role, we are trying to diversify revenue and free cash flow at the parent company level, and we're doing it inorganically and specifically in what we call clean tech. So to me, that means resource efficiency. And so we have and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but a pretty clearly defined path to build a multi-billion-dollar operating business to diversify at the parent co level.
Again, my name is Woody Falk. I'm the Vice President of Innovation and New Ventures at Chick-fil-A. For our international guests, you may not be familiar with our company. We're a 52-year-old privately held restaurant company. We specialize in a boneless breast chicken sandwich, but we sell other things as well. We do have some smaller brands. My time with Chick-fil-A has been moving around the organization, leading functional verticals, including design, including a part of construction, operations, marketing, and new product development. But I'm in a role now, which is the best, where basically we're turning our talent into innovators. And we've got some unique practices to do that. We'll drill down into that in a few moments. But I did want to thank you for coming for the last session, because it'd be really lonely if you weren't here now. So thank you for coming.
Woody, we're going to go ahead and keep it with you and let you keep rolling with that. I think Woody within Chick-fil-A has a very interesting job where he has to almost wear 2 different hats. One is balancing internal innovation teams working on projects internally for Chick-fil-A, but then he also leads the New Ventures group, which goes out and tries to partner with startups to run pilot programs and then scale those across the organization. So I'd love it if you could elaborate a little bit more on kind of what those 2 groups focus on, and how, in your role as the leader of those groups, how you delegate different tasks down through that. And then the rest of the group, if you want to respond, how do each of you within your roles collaborate with other internal innovation teams or innovation teams within your organization?
So starting off, we define innovation as problem solving or exploiting opportunities. And there are 2 different ways of thinking about it. Most of innovation at the core is around, there's a problem, it needs to be addressed. How can we do that in the best manner? And they organize teams that way. Other organizations will take a small group to pursue opportunities. The way we're organized is we have a central innovation group that runs our innovation practice. We have an innovation center like most of you probably do. We teach a variety of innovation techniques. Matter of fact, every new person at Chick-fil-A, when you come aboard on our staff, you're required to go through an innovation basics course within your first year, and then we have advanced innovation courses beyond that. So the innovation practice literally coordinates your training, but then we also facilitate, we consult with project teams, we help them find a path through the fog inside of a big corporation. We will even assist with running simulations and projects for them. So that's our innovation group. The second group is called Beyond the Restaurant, and their charge is to find new revenue streams, to ideate, to create, to test them, and they're focused exclusively on the core business. And then the third group is the New Venture Group. Their purpose is to really chase these opportunities. And so it's a smaller team, they're outside of the core, but they're still very close to the core, but they're free to use incubators and accelerators as their laboratories. They're nearby Chick-fil-A, but they're not necessarily in Chick-fil-A. And so that's the three that we have. We do have a fourth one, though, that's just popped up. It's called Red Wagon. And Red Wagon is a venture group that is designed to find big concepts that are much further out, actually starting with the year 2030 and working back. And then they have the freedom to really explore these possibilities. So organized 4 ways.
Will, Carrie, do you guys want to elaborate on kind of what happens within your organizations and how you collaborate with different innovation groups?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So, clean tech is, I mean, there's no other way to put it other than it's a super new for Cox Enterprises as an operating idea. We've been deploying sustainability initiatives internally for quite a while, for like 20 or 30 years actually. And I think if we go and if we really accounted for investment in what would be pure play sustainability initiatives, we're probably north of 300 million invested internally, double-digit IRR to just green our footprint. But my role is to build a business in sustainability is really net new. And so what we try to do is draw really firm boundaries where we're not stepping on the toes of innovation efforts at our operating businesses. So let's take EV charging is a great example, right? We have an $8 billion automotive business with various adjacent growth and venture teams and things like that within it. You could see overlap between what my team is trying to do and what they might be looking at. So in terms of collaboration, we certainly share deals and ideas, but almost more than anything, we're trying to create boundaries around what's our sort of sandbox versus what belongs in the operating co. And then I would say in addition to that, what's really, really important for us to do is to stay very, very close to our M&A team and our corporate strategy team, because we don't have a defined pre-carved out fund for our efforts. Rather, we're investing off the balance sheet. And so we need to keep close connectivity with those groups to ensure capital availability and with the divisions, frankly, so we don't run out of new growth capital or find ourselves in any sort of an issue there.
Yeah, so at Delta Airlines, our innovation center also, it sounds a lot like yours, Woody, how we serve as internal consultants back to the business units. We are divided into 5 groups since we started the year with 3. So always being nimble and always iterating ourselves. For the most part, our directives come from the top down. Our leaders tell us generally what to focus on for a year or sometimes for a project. And we take those directives and begin, understanding the possibilities. And here are our 5 groups. 2 of the groups, the 2 main groups, are focused on the 2 divisions of our organization. We've got the commercial division, the commercial group, and so we've got Hanger Innovation teammates dedicated to the commercial group. We have teammates dedicated to the operations group. And so they're always working to understand possibilities and tie those in with leadership desires. And then working, of course, to understand customer experience and human experience for the solutions that they are creating. The other groups, the team that I'm on the experimental team, and we are looking at concepts 5 to 10 years out, which is a lot of fun for me. It's a lot of brainstorming and wishful thinking, and also futuring and studying what might be possible trends and solutions in the future. And then finally, we have a venture portion of our team, brand new, so a smaller group, focused on how to connect with partners, startups, et cetera, and bringing in those opportunities to Delta. And then finally, we do have a team specialized towards AI, ML, and et cetera. I think I've covered it all. We basically try to partner 50-50 with the business groups. It'll be half the hangar doing the work and then a strong partnership. Innovation is collaboration, and we find that the more we involve the business groups and the more that we bring them along the journey and the more that we help them understand innovative methods and design thinking, the better the whole process goes.
That's an interesting point with breaking down the walls within the business groups. If you guys could kind of touch on how do you do that? How do you gain the trust of those different teams and show them that what you're trying to do is actually create value for them?
I have some thoughts on it as an outside,
Of course.
Party coming in, and oftentimes I find that innovation might, when we get engaged, it might come from one part of the organization, and their understanding of what success looks like is often not fully fleshed out. It's usually, there may be a directive from a higher up, or here's an area we want to go after, but when we start really digging into the intent behind it, that's something that often isn't not maybe well defined or thought through, but also not a shared definition across the company. And so when we go in to do some of this work, we've reached to the parts of the business that might traditionally be left behind. Sometimes that's legal, sometimes that's finance, sometimes that's HR, people that truly are the enablers of operationalizing these ideas. And so it's not just maybe the business and the innovation group, but it's thinking about what are the operating models that have to happen once this idea or concept moves forward, and inviting them into the process. It then creates shared understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing it. Very quickly, you can have the same group, get in and ask everyone to define what the problem is, and very quickly see that there's 5 different definitions around that table. So explicit clarity, language is so important, documentation, continuing to revisit the concepts that were brought. And sometimes the process, I think, can feel a bit tedious. It does help to have, whether it's an innovation function, like a shared function like you do at Delta or Chick-fil-A, come in to be able to facilitate that, an outside party like us, because that process then allows the creativity to flow in the ideas, and much less about what is the process, how do we get creative around the process. Let the process be, and then the creativity come from the people and the freedom within that.
I can add to that, just trust the process. As a designer at Delta, there aren't very many of me, and design thinking is a newer, more organized method of practicing innovation at Delta Airlines. We've been practicing innovation for quite some time, but now we've begun to put structure around it. And so when I go to a new group and I say, oh, we're going to do this fun workshop, and it's going to be highly collaborative, engaging, and interactive, and we're going to have ideas, in the first 2 hours about possible solutions, there can be a lot of surprise and also some resistance to, aren't we moving too fast, or what is this going to feel like? That's a very non-traditional way of working. And I always just say, trust the process, and I find that we have meetings and meetings and meetings. I can explain it all day long, and I do. But once we have those workshops, and once they see and feel the process of working through innovative methods and tools and design thinking, totally won over. So really, it's just engaging them in the process so that they can understand.
Couple
value.
tactical things. We don't push innovation at our company. We use a pull strategy, and we really help the teams that are very much trying to solve something seriously. And we just load them up with resources and help them. Specifically, one of the tactical things that's worked the best is we've embedded innovation coaches in all the functional areas. We have a very formal, robust innovation coaches program. We really load them up with some incredible training. We take them to Stanford D School and spend a week out there. We give them a tour of Silicon Valley, some of the more interesting stops and the accelerators. And then we feed them intellectually and with compensation throughout the year for being an innovation coach within their functional area. And so it's become a really highly coveted role, and it's a way to really affect their career climb at our company. So decentralizing innovation has allowed us to really enjoy more of this pull strategy. The second tactical thing I'll just mention is inside a big corporation, very different than a small organization. It's really so much about communication, and you hear that, so of course we have to communicate. But innovators like to create. They want to be in the work. They do not want to take time. It feels like a tax to have to go across the organization and give a PowerPoint update on a project. But it's crucial, and so we teach a simple 4C method that first you're going to create something, but then you have to get up physically, go to another group and communicate about what you're working on. And then there's a moment where you realize, gosh, we thought we knew what was going on. We need to have a little bit of clarification here about what's happening. And then there's a calibration. So that 4C, once we get calibrated, we go right back in. And so we walk that process out regularly, and it's really helped a lot with navigating a big company.
The point on communication, so when I did strategy work at Cox Communications, so one of our operating businesses, our sister team was called New Growth and Development. This was an internal innovation team. And I was there when we launched our home security business, which is now, I don't know, $300 or $400 million line of business, and various other trials of new businesses. And where I saw the process struggle the most was in a disconnect between the ideation group and the operational teams that would actually implement that idea. And it took us years to figure it out and to get that process humming. And it was all looped into communication and with the groups you mentioned, finance, legal, our call center folks who actually have to pitch this product. Like the folks thinking about innovation just think that like they want to plug it into the machine and then it just goes. And when we got operational in our focus, I saw us have so much more success and move so much more quickly. And also, everybody was more excited about it. Like, you get people bought in, then they want to do it.
Yeah, one micro tactic here, and it's a great point. We kept running up into the legal wall, and we're working with startups, and we would squash them with non-disclosure documents and frighten most of them away. And so finally we said, well, why don't we just go and invite some of our corporate lawyers on our team? And so we did. We got them on a tour of duty for a few months. They began to understand how delicate they needed to be with startups, and we created an internal system where we can sign all our non-compliance documents within 24 hours, and we're flying. So that's a great point about cross-functionality.
I often joke that my job is to protect the startups from the mothership and to protect the mothership from the startups. Like, neither really want to know what the other one's doing, right? And we have the same thing going on, and I think it, probably weren't as formal as it sounds like the way you were in terms of structuring a program, but we've spent an enormous amount of time with our internal legal counsel, who are excellent, by the way, and that's the reason why they're able to squash these startups.
Excellent at protecting.
You got it, at risk aversion, right? Which is, for a huge company, what you do a lot of the time, right? And so again, it boils down to communication for me, though. What's your purpose?
So we've started to touch on it. If there's one thing that innovators love, it's a very well-defined process. I would love to dive in a little bit deeper into that. Will, I know your team has a very well-defined investment thesis and methodology about how you all are thinking about building this clean tech industry. If you want to kick us off, and then everybody else can kind of jump in with their specific methodologies and try to identify some overlap between you all.
Yeah, sure, happy to. I guess maybe I'll start by saying I think my role is a little different than some of my peers up here, in the sense that we're really building inorganic growth versus innovating within the business. We have the great luxury of being privately owned, which affords us the ability to think really generationally, which is actually how we think for this business. We have a 2034 goal. So you mentioned 2030, Woody, and I think a 5 to 10 year horizon. So we think even further out than that, which is a great thing that we can do. And when we started this group, what we kind of sat down and said is, okay, the worst thing we can do is try to hit home runs on day one and strike out. And it's important in a big company like ours to keep momentum and to keep people engaged. And you don't want to have a big loss right out in the first inning. And so we designed a process that I think is working really, really well, that the easy way to describe it is crawl, walk, run, where we said, okay, let's first get really smart in these clean tech sectors. So we cover food and ag, water, and energy. And so let's dive really deep into those sectors. And I mean like take a year and do strategy work, build networks, build investment theses, and whittle those down to the sharpest 5 or 6. We did that in 2018. And then let's start to invest capital, but let's do that in a way that mitigates our risk a little bit. Because the truth is we don't know. Like, this is new stuff for us. And while we've done, we think, some really great strategy work, we could be totally wrong in all 5 or 6 of those areas. And so can we find companies that are reasonably early stage raising Series A, B, C capital, where we can take a minority stake, maybe take a board seat, get to know the management team, test our thesis. We like to build specific triggers on the front end of that investment that help inform us with our internal stakeholders as to what would be defined as success versus failure for that investment and for the thesis. And if things are playing out the way that we hope they do, if we were right, okay, now we have the opportunity, hopefully, to put more capital into that company, to potentially acquire another business in the sector, and to start pulling together a real operating business. So I think, phase 1 is sort of strategy and minority investing. Phase 2 is ideally middle market acquisitions. And then phase 3 in my mind is scale up. So now, once we have a foothold, phase 1's kind of toehold. Once we have a foothold in phase 2, now we want to scale the business. And that's where, what we're targeting are sort of north of $1 billion acquisition opportunities. And we're trying to build very clear, very measurable milestones that help us understand when we're moving from phase 1 to 2 to 3, and what our risks are and what the opportunities are. And we have to be flexible. Like, we're going to evolve this the whole way, but at least we have a plan to execute against. And we found that to be super helpful.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in on that one, or?
About our methodology, yes.
Go for
So
it.
ours sounds a little bit different. At the Hanger Innovation Center, we found all of our work around design thinking, and so it's a human-centered design approach. Ours is a simple cycle. It starts with discover, which, if you're familiar with design thinking, it can mean understanding, empathizing, investigating, any words related. Every company, every design thinker has their own way to describe it. So at the top of that cycle is discover, and we spend time discovering everything possible about the topic or the challenge. Especially, we spend a lot of times with the human users. So it could be our frontline gate agents, pilots. It could be other airport agents. A lot of times it's our customers. We care so much about their experiences and what's going on for them and how we can enable a more effortless travel experience for them. In addition, so moving from discover, after we discover what's going on with our customers and the other humans involved, we always align with, obviously, our business partners, looking for stakeholders who might have information or history or even ideas and other data points that can guide our way. And finally, in the discover phase, obviously, we're looking at other industry examples, beginning to calculate risk and make some safe assumptions about other tactics that other companies have taken. So moving on from discover, after we've learned a tremendous amount about a topic, we move into design. And we've got enough data and enough information swirling at that point to begin low fidelity design. So sketching, mapping, and storyboarding, just beginning to envision and what the possibilities could be. And we take those designs and we begin to socialize them and prioritize them, and many of them turn into concepts, and concepts become MVPs, minimum viable products. From design, they move into deliver, where we test the proof of concept or the minimum viable product in a market setting in a small way so that we can just understand what's going on. And then finally, whatever the response is there, we can choose to let it go, off to the business group, hand it off to the team in need, or we can begin that cycle again if we are surprised by the results and found something unfavorable or something that could be improved.
Thank you.
We do a very similar process using design thinking. I would say I'll go a little bit further upstream, thinking about some of the people in the room, specifically from the startup side. When we engage with a company, a lot of our process starts with, it's a proprietary model, but it's around innovation intent. And so what is the why behind it? And so for us to come in really, and you think about it as an outside party, and many of you would be startups as an outside party coming into a corporate culture, understanding what's important to them. So I often hear, oh, we're opening up a lab. Okay, that is a way to do it, or we're doing corporate venturing, or we're having an internal innovation function. And then you ask about what the outcomes are. And so we're opening up a lab. What is your goal? Our goal is that we want to have $2 billion in new revenue, for instance, okay? What are you doing? Well, we're going to open up on a college campus, and we're going to put half of resource, and we're going to give, $25,000 to get started. But we want $1 billion return. Well, I don't know any company that has invested $25,000 and got $1 billion and put 2 interns on it, and that probably is not the outcome of what a lab in that environment would offer. Maybe it's talent development, maybe it's exposure to new thinking or university relations. So helping them think through not only the ways in which they're going to do it, but the why behind it. What are the outcomes? And then very clearly, you almost have this rubric that then begins to say, if this is your outcome, then we would do these things. And so as an outsider coming into some of these companies, I think that, doing the work and in those conversations so that they don't squash you, because it's very easily can happen. And I think that corporates have the responsibility to do that due diligence to create an environment that they can get an NDA done in 24 hours. But I think that startups, or smaller companies coming in also have to recognize that you're not dealing with another startup. So what are the ways in which you begin to engage that help you get the outcomes you want? And then the second piece, I would say the only iteration on the design thinking piece, because we do a very, very similar process when we're actually engaged, is instead of minimum viable, we've started focusing on minimally awesome, which is a very common term you'll hear. But the reason I say that is that we focus on high levels of desirability. Finding if we can, viability and feasibility, yes, those are things, but if I only focus on, is it feasible for our business today? Is it viable with the technology we have? I might be missing an opportunity to really surprise, delight, meet my customers, and that can be B2B or B2C, wherever they are. So focusing first on desirability, understanding that user there, then we go into more detailed design or feasibility work in which we find out the how it might come to life.
Chick-fil-A is very similar. We use our version, design thinking, and all the tools, Scrum, Agile, everything. What I wanted to point out, though, is this nuance between creating something in an innovation space, make it yourself, and the cycle time that requires and the resources versus curating solutions through outside partners. And we have learned in more recent times the power of just joint collaboration with startups exclusively on some bodies of work, and quit trying to just create it in our own world. We do both, but we're getting further faster by really being active around not just the U.S., but the world. We have listening posts now in 3 other countries where we begin to hear things, kind of low pinging off the radar that a trend's coming. And then we begin search. We literally have a research team that begins to say, let's learn a little bit more about that. And then we find out that there are people who are already starting to engage around that trend or that topic. And so by the time it shows up in our industry trade press, it's already moving, and we feel we're behind and we have to go create a response. So just a lot of power around curating an existing solution instead of trying to create one yourself.
Thank you. Woody, you started to touch on this, so this next question I'm gonna put towards Casey and Carrie. Within your organizations and around design thinking and the conceptualization of different innovative solutions within your organization, how do you push those through to action so that the business units that asked for it are deploying the solutions you put all this work and all this effort behind?
I have some thoughts. Feel free to go.
I have plenty. So a surprising amount of my time is spent storytelling and communicating. That's surprising because, much like it's been mentioned, I'm an innovator. I want to make things, and I want to hand it off, and I want it to become the thing it was meant to be with the team it was meant for, and that's just not how it works. So I have learned to communicate to my stakeholders for them. So revenue management wants to hear one thing, and my consumer insights group wants to hear about NPS, and my VPs want to hear about metrics and data. So I've learned to do my work, do my research, find the moments that matter for the audience that I need to present to, and attempt to convey, because it's most important to me in my work, the human experience, even if the solution is a highly technical, really impressive, piece of future technology. I want to talk about how the human benefits, because that's where the value is. We can come up with tech solutions all day long, but if they're not serving anyone, then it's a broken solution from the beginning. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thinking about the operationalizing of these ideas and concepts, especially when oftentimes we're an outside partner that's helping facilitate that, that can be a blessing and a curse. It can be a blessing because you are able to say and point things out that maybe internally would, wouldn't have the liberty to do. That's why they're paying you to come in. On the other side is you are an outsider. It wasn't built here. You're not you don't understand how difficult this person is to get it through. And so it's finding that balance and really getting to understand a company's DNA and understanding which of those is your blessing or your curse. I think that some of the things that we do very tactically are understanding what it means to carry an idea forward, what it means in that organization to run a business, what are the things that are important, is it revenue driven, is it, are we focusing on the P, are we focusing on the L, do we just need to lose less money, is that a win? And being able to understand the DNA of that organization and then building the actual innovation case. You talked a bit about the talent aspect of it, of developing the people, and I think of an example, we have a collab that we run with Nationwide Insurance, and we're focused with them on really, disruptive innovations independent of their insurance or financial business. And one of the things as this has been a learning experience as they're building this out, and we recognize that coming out of the innovation, the pilots, or the development of that and the running of a business are very different. And so just because you might have somebody that's attached to this idea that, it was their baby, right? And like you said, you like to build it and hand it off. I'm similar in this fact that I really like to build something. I'm not always the person that wants to run it. Recognizing that and recognizing that there's sometimes, and I know that some of the folks over in Cox Communications, your venture group, they actually have that model in which let's go chase the next thing because we're really great at building. And so I think that recognizing within a company that, and maybe you need a GM function for the running of it, and that where you would source that, maybe they're not from corporate, maybe you're bringing in a startup. So I think just a really strong self-awareness of what you are as an organization, what is that DNA, and then figuring out the talent strategy that actually moves it forward. And oftentimes systems perform exactly how they're designed. So it's probably a broken system that is causing a poor outcome.
And I think you need a C-level champion. So, and you mentioned chief strategy officers and specifically CSOs that are not reporting to like the CFO, but they actually have a seat at the table. Having that champion, and for me in clean tech, it's our CEO, Alex Taylor. He is hell-bent on building a business in sustainability. Like, he's gonna do it. And so it gives you the oxygen to go and innovate, and it also gives you kind of the oomph to then plug that into the organization. That was a really important thing for us at CCI with the team you're talking about.
So we have an interesting dynamic on stage with private versus public company. And I think, Will, what you were just touching on is an element that definitely plays into that with the exposure to executive leadership. I was wondering if you guys could kind of just, we're running out of time here, but kind of quickly play off what you guys notice within your respective organizations and maybe what you observe from the other side.
I mean,
We can go to the next one. It's
we won't
okay.
engage with a company unless there's an executive stakeholder at the table. It just usually is not a positive outcome for either party. And we're a professional services firm, so good work usually leads to good work. And if we don't know that outcome is going to happen, so that's one of our pieces of it. I completely agree with having that executive buy-in there. I think that also being able to understand what truly is the voice that matters in that
Right.
room. It's not always who you think, it might be Alex Taylor in that scenario, but sometimes it can be the financial arm. It can be, there's a lot of different moving factors. And so from an outsider perspective, there's a lot of, I think, lessons learned. You mentioned, Carrie, about looking to, your peers at other companies. One of the roles I think that we bring is the fact that we have exposure to a lot of different operating models. And so being able to hopefully de-risk some of this decision making by bringing the war stories or skin knees from other experiences and saying, hey, this might be a way to navigate that. So I don't know if that gets to your question,
No,
but
definitely.
that's the
And
position
I'm
that
glad
we
you
take.
answered it as an outside provider because you actually work with both sides. So
Yeah.
probably the best perspective.
For
What
sure.
I tend to think of, I typically share the fact that we are private as an advantage that I have, right? And I think that it is, and specifically as a clean tech investor, which is a reasonably new sector. There was Clean Tech 1.0, where a bunch of venture funds got blown up 10 years ago and lost their money. And I think we're kind of in Clean Tech 2.0 today. This is a new space, and we have to be able to think really long term. And what I find in talking to the investor community around these types and startups in this space is that they struggle in terms of appeal to folks with shorter time horizons. So I love being private from that standpoint. I do think that if I'm being honest about the other side of the coin, we have less pressure around crisp, fast decision making because of exactly my first point. And so our communication loops, decision-making processes need to be super crisp. We actually, I try to limit the number of people in the room for a decision, not because I don't like everybody, but because we need to be able to be hyper-focused on exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. And we don't have the market pushing us like a public company might.
We're up against the time, but it'd be really interesting if we could tell them something we're working on that might be interesting. If we did it rapid fire, do we have enough time to do that?
Yeah, of course. So a couple quick rapid fire questions. I think innovation is always innovating itself. I'm wondering if each of you could just give me a quick few words, what you kind of see next coming down the pipeline in terms of innovation within corporations and then innovation within the broader community.
Yeah, so we're always talking about how do you innovate innovation. And there's a lot written, that's the wrong word even. And for us, what we believe is next is really just focusing on innovation principles and less around the buzz terms. It's like if I hear one more story of let's go build an innovation center and all it really is a fancy meeting place. I mean, that's the whole thing. But at the heart of innovation is really finding incredible talent, curious minds, skills, and then putting a compelling challenge in front of them and then loading them up with resources and putting a meaningful level of time pressure on them. And so it really is kind of like back to the basics of that premise. That's what we're doing, is we're just stripping it down to simple innovation. I will mention this, our first innovation space was beautiful, it was big, it was brilliant, it got in all the magazines and the media, and we discovered within a few weeks we made a horrible mistake because we started getting corporate tourism. We couldn't get any work done, and we had to go into a generic building off campus just to get innovation done.
And the folks who were in there needed to go speak to everybody in the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a principle.
I actually would mimic the exact same thought. I think what I'm seeing at Cox Enterprises and within our operating businesses is I'll call them legit innovation efforts, whether it's inorganic diversification like what I'm doing or organic innovation like we were doing at Cox Communications when I was there. The ones that are blessed and have real C-suite stakeholders are getting stripped down. Incentives are being reshaped, both with the carrot and the stick. And it's looking more like what I would expect to see innovation in a startup looking like, where there's real risk and real reward. I think the corporate methods have struggled in the past, at least to some extent, because there's always a big safety net. This is the reason that startups always have tended to out-innovate big corporates, is because they were hungrier, in my opinion. We're recreating some of that hunger, I think.
I'm really fascinated by the talent aspect of it. So it does build on what you were saying, but different incentive structures. So bringing in people that truly get an upside of what they're building. Sometimes I get, somebody will say, I'm looking for XYZ person to come do this. And by the time they tell me all the things they're doing, I'm thinking, and what upside do they have there? Why wouldn't they just go build that themselves? And so I love the fact that I think that there are getting to be some creative ways in which corporates are willing to maybe share some of the reward in that. And I'm really keen on the conversations. I was having one this morning around diversity and talent and diversity in thought and how it plays in innovation. I think that a lot of times you would see in some of these centers that are being created, very traditional backgrounds that were coming together. And one thing that I've noticed in our own company is that a lot of times the innovation rock stars, so to speak, people that are very successful at getting buy-in or driving ideas forward or bringing diversity of thought are not maybe what you would write on paper if you were in a big corporate and going to seek someone. Storytelling, you mentioned, like we have so many people that come from a journalism background. There's a natural curiosity that comes there, a really powerful storytelling component that make them incredibly effective. Investigative journalism and kind of detective work actually has been somewhere that we've seen that. So there's just, I love that aspect of it, and I'm fascinated by it, and incentive structures that go along with it. And I think it's getting away from maybe the big shiny objects, and it's actually truly what are the things that are going to make it different.
When it comes to how do I see innovation innovating in the future, I really appreciate the model, Woody, that you and your team are practicing. I see innovation as a function throughout a corporation, having innovation coaches or innovation catalysts spread throughout the organization. As it is right now, my group sits off-site, outside of the main headquarters, and it served us well for these first 3 years. And we're beginning the conversation around what does our future look like, and how might we be closer to the business and to those business groups, maybe even living and working with them on a daily basis, so that innovation is happening in a more rapid and more collaborative manner versus, it's project time, let's have a meeting and let's innovate through that more organized way. So yeah, something to look forward to.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you guys for sticking around. Hopefully you guys learned something this afternoon, and we'll be around a little bit longer if anybody wants to ask any questions. So thank you again.